So imagine you walk into a mechanic's shop and your car is just an absolute wreck.
Oh, yeah. Like the windshield is totally shattered, the transmission is grinding.
Exactly. The tires are completely bald, the radio only plays static, and you hand the mechanic the keys expecting this massive itemized list of catastrophic failures.
Right, because that's logical.
But the mechanic just takes one look, crosses their arms, and says, I know exactly what the problem is. There's literally only one thing wrong here.
Which goes against every instinct we have, you know. We naturally assume our broken windshield has a completely different structural cause than our broken radio.
Yeah, but today's source material acts just like that mechanic. It looks at the massive, overwhelming list of human miseries and diagnoses one single, solitary root cause.
It really does.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping into a highly provocative piece of philosophical writing from 2011 by an author named Xu Feng. The essay is titled, Selfishness is the Stumbling Block to Heaven.
Quite the title.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to examine the text's central argument, which is that the traditional ways you and I live, specifically getting married, having a family, and engaging in personal business, are actually elaborate traps designed to force us into selfishness.
And we're going to explore that diagnosis and then unpack the highly specific, tightly controlled alternative lifestyle the author proposes as the cure.
Now, real quick, before we get into the weeds here, we should put out a disclaimer.
Yes, definitely. As we navigate this, it's really important to state that the concepts in this text represent a sweeping and very specific worldview. We are simply here as guides to help you map out this unique intellectual territory.
Exactly. We aren't endorsing the author's philosophies, and we're not taking sides or trying to debunk them either. We are just unpacking the mechanics of these fascinating ideas.
Right, just looking at what the text actually says.
So, okay, let's unpack this. To understand the radical solution proposed later in the text, we have to start with this blanket diagnosis of the human condition. Xu Feng opens the essay by listing just a barrage of negative human emotions.
He really covers the whole spectrum.
He does. He writes about looking at the people around him and seeing this endless cycle of worry, anger, jealousy, hatred, complaining, pessimism.
He even includes the ambient, low-level feeling of life simply being not satisfying.
Yeah, just that general malaise.
It's a comprehensive catalog of psychological and social suffering. But rather than analyzing these emotions as separate psychological phenomena, he employs this relentless, rapid-fire question-and-answer format to collapse them all into one category.
It reads like an interrogation. I mean, he literally asks, why are you angry? And answers, because you are selfish.
And then, why do you commit bribery or accept a bribe? The answer is the same.
Because you are selfish.
Exactly. Then he pushes this logic into territory that most modern societies view as entirely positive, or at least, neutral.
Right. He asks, why do you want to open a company to do business? And the answer remains identical. Because you are selfish.
That specific example is wild because it subverts the entire economic narrative of the entrepreneur as an innovator or like a community builder.
Yeah.
In the framework of this text, the drive to open a business is indistinguishable from the drive to take a bribe or gossip behind someone's back.
See, and I find myself immediately wanting to challenge the logic there.
It's a natural reaction.
Right, claiming that anxiety about your future, taking a bribe, and opening a bakery to feed your neighborhood all stem from the exact same moral failure. It feels like a massive oversimplification.
It's a very broad brush.
It's like going to the doctor with a broken arm, a migraine, and a sneeze, and being told the root cause for all of them is simply dehydration. Why does the author draw such an unforgiving line between existing in society and being inherently selfish?
Well, the author operates on a strict binary regarding human consciousness. There's no middle ground, no spectrum of morality here. On one side of this binary, you have what he calls the vastness of the universe, which can only be experienced through a completely selfless mind.
So total selflessness.
Right. He points to the archetype of the sage, someone who systematically puts themselves last and, by doing so, paradoxically finds themselves harmonized with the entire universe.
Okay, so the sage dissolves their ego and expands outward. What is the alternative?
The alternative is the laity, which is just ordinary people living ordinary lives.
Like you and me.
Exactly. The text argues that the ordinary person puts themselves first. They contract their focus inward, prioritizing their own immediate needs, their own property, their own status.
Right.
And the consequence of that contraction, as the author bluntly phrases it, is that the ordinary person ultimately finds himself death.
Wow. finds himself death.
Yeah. By shrinking your universe down to just yourself, you cut yourself off from the broader flow of existence and guarantee your own suffering.
That paints a stark picture of the human default state. But if selfishness is the root of everything from generalized anxiety to corporate greed, we have to ask what is actually generating that selfishness.
Right.
Like, are we just born with a defective psychological operating system?
The text pivots here, and this is where the philosophy becomes truly controversial. The author does not blame human nature in a vacuum. He doesn't believe we are inherently evil.
Okay, so what's to blame?
He blames the structural design of society itself.
Yeah, the text points the finger directly at the core institutions most of us build our entire lives around. It argues that anyone living in a traditional marriage or a traditional family unit is literally mandated to be selfish in order to survive.
It's unavoidable in his eyes.
Pursuing wealth, claiming possession over someone through the legal bind of marriage, competing with neighbors for resources, these are not framed as personal moral failings. They are framed as strict, unavoidable requirements of the traditional life program.
This raises an important question, because we typically view morality as an internal compass. We tell people to just be better. But this text views societal institutions as an environmental design flaw.
Yeah, the environment dictates the behavior.
Exactly.
Think about playing a ruthless board game, like Monopoly. If you and I sit down to play, the literal rules of the physical board dictate that I must hoard property, charge you exorbitant rent, and try to bankrupt you.
And if you don't do that, you lose.
Right. I cannot play Monopoly selflessly. If I decide to just give you all my money out of the goodness of my heart, the game breaks and I am eliminated. The environment of the board forces me to adopt a selfish strategy just to stay in the game.
That dynamic is exactly how the author views the traditional family structure.
Yeah.
You are placed on a board where the rules require you to secure resources for your specific household, often at the expense of others.
See, but I am struggling to reconcile that with the massive amounts of genuine self-sacrifice that occur within a family. Parents routinely give up their sleep, the financial security, and their personal ambitions to raise a child. Spouses care for each other through terminal illnesses, completely putting their own needs aside. To categorize the family unit as purely a vehicle for selfishness seems to just ignore the very real, grinding selflessness that happens in domestic life every single day.
That's a really fair point, but within the specific framework of Wefang's text, that parental or spousal sacrifice is still ultimately directed inward.
Inward, even when giving up everything for your kid.
Yes, because it is directed toward the self's extended biological or legal unit.
Yeah.
You are sacrificing for your child, your spouse, your family's legacy. You are drawing a circle around a few specific people and prioritizing their survival over the rest of humanity.
Oh, I see.
The text demands universal detachment. A truly selfless person in this philosophy would treat every single child on Earth with the exact same level of devotion as their own biological child.
Which is almost unimaginable.
Right, and the traditional framework of marriage and family simply isn't built to sustain that level of universal, undirected love.
Okay, so if the traditional game of life, the Monopoly board we are all born onto, is fundamentally rigged to force us into localized selfish behavior, the logical next step is finding a new way to play. We can't just wish the rules away while standing on the same board.
You have to build a completely new transit station.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text introduces an alternative lifestyle framework called the second home, which the author notes is also referred to as the new oasis for life.
And the rules for entering this second home are absolute.
Very absolute. They require the systematic dismantling of everything the traditional world uses to define identity and security. Residents must completely dissolve their marriages and break apart their traditional family units.
They have to surrender all personal property too.
Yep. And they're instructed to avoid forming any special relationships with any single person.
It is a radical stripping away of all localized attachments. The author argues this is the only way to destroy the fertile soil for the selfishness seed.
Right.
Because when you don't own property, you have nothing to hoard. When you don't have a spouse or a favored child, you have no reason to prioritize one human life over another.
I keep hitting a wall, though, when trying to imagine how a community actually mandates that humans form no special relationships. I mean, we are biologically and psychologically wired for attachment.
Just human nature.
We form best friends, we fall in love, we have people we naturally gravitate toward. Can an environment actually overwrite that core human programming?
Well, the author's premise is that what we call natural human programming is actually an adaptation to scarcity and fear.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. In the traditional world, we form special relationships as alliances to secure resources and emotional safety in a hostile environment. Second Home attempts to overwrite this by removing the hostile environment entirely. The community operates on what the text calls paradise management.
Let's dig into the mechanics of this paradise management, because the text claims that the daily struggle for survival is entirely removed from the individual's shoulders.
Completely gone.
There is no fame to chase, no wealth to accumulate, no power structure to climb. Basic human needs, food, clothing, accommodation, transportation, and even the heavy existential burdens of healthcare and aging are completely absorbed by the community.
By guaranteeing absolute security from cradle to grave, the structural incentives for selfishness evaporate. If you know with absolute certainty that you will be fed tomorrow and cared for when you are elderly, you stop hoarding resources today.
But how does the physical society actually function without those incentives? Like, if no one is chasing wealth and no one is worried about starving, who's doing the labor? Who is growing the food, building the houses, or doing the unglamorous work of maintaining infrastructure?
The text implies a massive gain in efficiency when you remove the artificial bloat of traditional society.
What do you mean by artificial bloat?
Think about the duplication of effort in the modern world. Millions of separate nuclear families, buying separate lawnmowers, cooking separate meals in millions of separate kitchens, driving separate cars to jobs that only exist to manage the complexities of capital.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
When you remove personal property and combine resources under a collective model, the actual physical labor required to meet basic human survival needs drops dramatically.
So the labor transforms from a desperate, individualized grind for survival into a shared, minimal community contribution.
And because it is uncoupled from wage slavery or status seeking, that shared labor is reframed as a spiritual duty. The residents are no longer working to survive, they're working to maintain the environment that allows for their spiritual growth.
It's literally like unlocking infinite resources mode in a video game.
Exactly.
Like when you no longer have to spend 8 hours a day chopping digital wood just to keep your character from freezing overnight, you stop grinding, you start doing the side quests, you explore the map.
The residents of the second home redirect all that freed up human energy towards self-cultivation. The text describes their days as being focused on playing games, entertainment, exhibiting sincerity and kindness, and purifying their souls.
Sounds nice.
They're accumulating merits and walking step by step toward heaven, completely unburdened by the material anxieties of the laity.
You know, the author leans heavily into historical context to justify why this specific physical environment is necessary. He brings up global philosophical heavyweights like Jesus, Sakyamuni, and Lao Tzu, claiming they all taught this exact same core message of eradicating selfishness.
What's fascinating here is he argues that despite the profound truth of those ancient teachings, they ultimately failed to transform humanity on a global scale.
Why?
Because they lacked the corresponding life program. They provided the ideological software, but they were trying to run it on incompatible hardware.
Right. I mean, you can preach universal love and selflessness to a crowd all afternoon, but if those people have to go back to a society where they must compete ruthlessly for a paycheck to feed their children, the teaching will just evaporate the moment they clock in for work.
Exactly. The second home is presented as the actual physical operating system required to run those ancient teachings successfully. It is the bespoke environment where the philosophy of the sages can finally be completely implemented without collapsing under the pressures of traditional survival.
Okay, but let's do a reality check here. If the environment does all the heavy lifting, what happens when a stubbornly selfish person walks through the doors of this second home?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. The text acknowledges that people entering this new lifestyle still carry their old habits, their traditional thinking, and their deeply ingrained values. Does the environment just magically overwrite their brain the moment they cross the threshold?
The text is remarkably frank in admitting that the answer is no. Entering the community does not instantly cure the psychological disease of selfishness.
It makes me think of taking a saltwater fish and dropping it into a pristine freshwater tank. The tank itself might be cleaner, perfectly filtered, and free of predators, but the organism is fundamentally adapted to the old, salty environment.
Yeah, exactly.
The sudden absence of what it's used to creates massive physiological shock.
And the new residents experience deep psychological dissonance. They have to actively engage in what the author calls continuous cultivation on one's soul garden. They must consciously work to shed the defense mechanisms they built in the traditional world.
But what if they can't shed them? What if the old hardware just fundamentally rejects the new code? The text introduces a concept that feels incredibly alarming given the utopian context.
The elimination mechanism.
Yes, it states that if a person is too slow to adapt to the new values and remains often selfish, there is an elimination mechanism.
The direct quote from the text is pretty stark. It says, he will eventually be eliminated, either eliminated by himself or by the new life program.
Doesn't the very existence of an elimination mechanism inherently contradict the unconditional harmony and happiness the text promises about heaven? Like, if residents are constantly under the threat of being purged by the program for not adapting fast enough, it seems like you're just replacing the financial anxiety of the traditional world with a terrifying new spiritual anxiety.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it would be terrifying if this elimination were dictated by a human leader acting as a judge or a bouncer, kicking people out for breaking the rules. But the author frames this mechanism through the underlying philosophical concept of Tao.
Okay, I need to understand how Tao functions here. How does a philosophical concept actively eliminate someone from a physical community?
Tao is understood in this framework not as a deity or a person, but as the fundamental, inescapable order of the universe. It is the natural law of cause and effect.
Cause and effect, okay.
The author argues that Tao is entirely neutral. It simply grants what you truly seek. If you cultivate a selfless mind, Tao naturally lifts you toward harmony.
And if someone stubbornly clings to their selfishness within the second home?
Tao grants that wish as well, along with all its inevitable systemic consequences. The text offers a stark warning. It says, if you want troubles and miseries, please be selfish. If you want to go to hell, be selfish. Tao will meet your wish.
Wow.
So the elimination mechanism is organic rejection. A selfish person attempting to operate within a completely selfless communal environment will generate immense social and psychological friction.
They'll just clash with everything.
Right. They will find the lack of personal property agonizing. They will find the absence of special relationships incredibly isolating.
They will effectively make themselves miserable until they either voluntarily leave to return to the traditional world that validates their selfishness, or the systemic friction of the community naturally pushes them to the margins. They just cannot survive the new ecosystem.
Exactly. Their own internal state makes the external paradise intolerable to them. The environment naturally purges what it cannot integrate.
Man, we have covered immense philosophical ground today. We started with the author's uncompromising diagnosis that every flavor of human misery, from taking a bribe to feeling generalized discontent, stems from the singular root cause of selfishness.
Yes.
And we explored the radical assertion that our traditional structures, our marriages, our family units, our businesses, are the very game boards that mandate this selfish behavior.
And we unpack the mechanics of the second home, examining how the complete dissolution of private property, exclusive relationships, and survival anxiety is presented as the only viable operating system for achieving true universal selflessness.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? While you may not be preparing to dissolve your relationships, abandon your bank accounts, and move into a resource-sharing commune today, a text like this serves a vital purpose.
It really does.
It forces you to scrutinize the environments you operate in every single day. Look at the structure of your workplace. Look at the dynamics of your social circles. Look at the invisible rules governing your daily routines. Do those environments inherently require and reward selfish behavior just to stay afloat? Are you playing a ruthless game of Monopoly without even realizing you rolled the dice?
It challenges us to recognize how deeply our environments shape our morality. But the text also leaves us with a lingering question about the core of human nature itself. The entire premise of the second home assumes that if you remove the struggle for resources and dismantle traditional attachments, our inherent universal selflessness will naturally bloom.
It assumes the hardware is good and only the software was corrupted.
Right. But think about this. If all of your basic survival needs were perfectly guaranteed tomorrow, and you had absolutely no personal property left to protect, would you naturally become completely selfless? Or would human nature, stripped of its traditional anxieties, simply invent an entirely new, unprecedented way to be selfish?
Would we just find a new part of the machine to break? Keep questioning the game board. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.